I can still smell that Sunday pot roast. Even now, decades later, the memory comes back with the faintest trace of rosemary in the air. Mother always cooked it the same way, slow, tender, filling the whole house with warmth. On those evenings, she would hum old church hymns under her breath. Never loud, just enough to carry a soft tune through the kitchen walls. It was late summer of 1978. I was 18, restless and hungry for a future I could almost touch. But in our house, dreams were served second. After Daniel's plate was full, we sat around the big oak table that had been in the Carter family for 3 generations. My father, Harold, took his place at the head, a position he wore as naturally as his pressed shirt and ironed trousers. Daniel, my older brother by 2 years, sat to his right with the golden boy's grin he carried everywhere. Mother, Ruth, served each of us with that steady, almost invisible patience of hers, and I sat to the left, quiet, observant, holding on to my own secret. "Daniel," Father began, voice heavy with pride, "your coach tells me you're being considered for captain next season." "Captain!" He clapped his hand on the table. "That's leadership. That's the kind of thing employers look for. You keep this up, son, and college doors will open wide for you." Daniel grinned, sheepish but pleased. "I hope so, Dad." I spooned potatoes onto my plate, waiting. My heart beat faster with every word, because in my purse, folded neatly, was a letter that already promised me more than hope. It was a letter that told me I had been accepted, not just to any college, but to one with a scholarship. A full ride, the kind of letter children like me only dream about. But I kept quiet, biting my tongue. I thought, let him finish. Let Daniel have his moment. My time will come. Mother placed the gravy boat in front of Father and smiled faintly. Her humming stopped. She gave me a glance, quick, almost guilty, but looked away before I could read it. Father carved another slice of roast and went on. "Education is a ladder, son, and you're climbing it. One day you'll have a good job, a family of your own, carry the Carter name with respect. That's what I've worked for. And what about me?" The words slipped out of me before I could stop them. The table grew still for a moment. Daniel looked down at his plate. Mother froze, her serving spoon suspended in midair. Father turned his eyes on me, steady and firm. "You'll do fine, Maggie. A woman doesn't need schooling the way a man does." My fork clinked against the plate. "But what if I want it?" I asked quietly. He sighed, as though the matter were too simple to require discussion. "You'll marry, you'll keep a good home. Maybe take a secretarial job until then. There's dignity in that. Your brother, he's the one who'll need the degree. It's different for men." The words stung, though I'd heard their shadow before. It's different for men. They were the iron bars around my world, and for the first time, I felt them close tight. Mother cleared her throat and tried to soften the silence. "Maggie helps so much already. She tutors Daniel, and she keeps her grades high. She's always been—" "That's her nature," Father interrupted, waving it off. "She's a good daughter, but Daniel will carry the family name into the world. That's just the way of things." I swallowed hard. I wanted to speak, to tell them about the letter folded in my purse, about the scholarship waiting for me. But the timing didn't feel right. The pride in Father's eyes when he looked at Daniel wasn't something I wanted to steal. Not that night, so I said nothing. I smiled faintly and passed the breadbasket to my brother. "Congratulations, Danny," I whispered. He nodded, grateful, maybe even guilty, but he didn't meet my eyes. After dinner, I helped Mother clear the plates. She hummed again, but softer, and I wondered if she knew something. There was always a flicker in her gaze, as if she carried secrets in her apron pocket. Later that night, when everyone else had gone to bed, I sat by my bedroom window with the scholarship letter in my hands. The porch light outside threw a pale glow across the words. Words that promised me a chance no one thought I would have. "You did it, Maggie," I whispered to myself. "You made it." I folded the letter back into its envelope and slid it under my Bible on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I'll tell them. They'll see me, not just as Daniel's sister, but as someone with a future of her own. I fell asleep with that hope burning in me, never imagining how quickly hope can turn to ashes. The next morning, another letter arrived in the mail. My name was written on the envelope in thick black ink. I didn't know it yet, but that letter would decide everything. My dreams, my family, and the long road to revenge. When I think back to those years, I realize how much of myself I poured into my family. Every morning before school, I'd slip into my uniform at the diner and serve steaming coffee to men on their way to the mill. They'd tip me quarters and nickels, sometimes a whole dollar if they were feeling kind. I never kept a cent for myself. Every coin went into a tin box I hid under my bed, labeled in my neatest handwriting, college fund. After school, I'd sit with Daniel at the kitchen table and help him with algebra. He was never much for numbers, but I stayed patient. "One more time," I'd say, guiding his hand to the pencil, showing him the steps. When he sighed, I'd smile. "You'll get it, I promise." I believed in him more than he believed in himself. That was the truth. I would have given him everything, my time, my energy, even my own dreams, if it meant he'd succeed. That's what sisters do, isn't it? At least, that's what I thought then. One evening, I came home from the diner and smelled something strange. Paper, not food, burning in the stove. Mother was bent over the firebox, her apron tied tight, her face lit by the orange glow. "Ma?" I asked, setting down my books. "What are you burning?" She startled, slamming the stove door shut, a guilty flicker in her eyes. "Nothing, Maggie. Just some scraps." But a corner of paper had fluttered onto the floor, half charred. I bent to pick it up before she could stop me. The words were smudged, but I could still read the letterhead at the top. "Dear Miss Margaret Carter." My heart dropped. It was my scholarship letter. I looked at her, my hands trembling. "Why, Ma? Why would you burn this?" Her face crumpled, but her voice stayed firm. "We just can't afford it, Maggie. Even with a scholarship, there are fees, travel, books. You'll only get hurt dreaming too big." I stepped back, clutching the singed fragment. But it was mine. I worked for it. I earned it. She reached for me, but I pulled away. "Your father and I talked about it. Daniel needs this more. He'll carry the family name. You'll understand one day. Understand?" I felt the floor tilt beneath me. All those mornings, all those coins in the tin, all those hours bent over textbooks. It felt like smoke, curling up the chimney. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the crackle of the fire in my head. Every word of that letter had been burned away, just like my future. The next week, I tried to hold on to hope. Maybe I could reason with Father. Maybe he hadn't made up his mind. Maybe Mother had only panicked. But hope, I was learning, can be cruel. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs just as Daniel was heading out the front door, his jacket slung over his shoulder. Father was handing him an envelope, thick with papers. The kind you didn't just toss aside. I caught a glimpse of the top page before Daniel tucked it away. Carter Family College Fund. Payable to Daniel Carter. The edges of my world went black for a moment, but my voice cut through. "What's that?" I asked, though I already knew. Father turned, calm as ever. "Your brother's future. Something we can all be proud of." Daniel avoided my eyes, muttered, "I'll see you later," and slipped out the door. I stood there frozen. My hands clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. They had stolen from me, not just money, not just a letter, but the very shape of my life. And in that moment, as the door shut behind Daniel, I felt something inside me change. I thought betrayal had a sound, the crackle of burning paper. But I was wrong. Betrayal was silence, the hush of my parents' voices as they let the door close behind my brother, carrying my future in his pocket. The town loved Daniel. It seemed everywhere I went that autumn, I heard his name spoken with pride. At the post office, Mrs. Turner clasped my mother's hands and said, "What a fine boy you've raised, Ruth. Off to university." That Harold Carter, he must have worked himself to the bone to afford such a blessing. At church, the pastor announced Daniel's acceptance as if it were an answered prayer. "The Carter family shows us what hard work and sacrifice can do." Heads nodded. Applause followed. I bowed mine, swallowing back the bitterness rising in my throat. What no one knew was that the sacrifice had come from me. I wasn't at college. I wasn't climbing ladders or earning accolades. Instead, I was behind a typewriter in the dusty office of Miller & Sons Hardware, taking dictation for men who spoke down to me as if I were part of the furniture. The keys clacked day after day, echoing like little hammers against my chest. I told myself it was honorable work, that there was dignity in earning my wage, but each paycheck reminded me of what had been stolen. Still, I tried to stay loyal. At night, I'd write Daniel letters of encouragement. "I hope your classes are going well. Don't forget to eat properly. I'm proud of you." I meant every word, even when they tasted like ashes. He didn't write back often, but when he did, the letters carried the same easy charm he'd always had. "Classes are tough, but I'm getting through. Dad says you're doing well at work. Keep it up, sis. I kept them folded neatly in my drawer, even as the ache in my chest grew heavier. The community's praise only deepened the wound. People looked at me as if I were lucky to be Harold Carter's daughter, the man who sacrificed for his son. They didn't know the truth. The scholarship burned, the lies told, the future handed to Daniel while mine turned to dust. One evening at supper, I tried again to raise the subject. The pot roast was on the table just like always, but it tasted different. Drier, bitter somehow. "Father," I began carefully, "I could still try for night classes. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Maggie, enough. You're our daughter, and we're proud of you. But Daniel carries the name. That's where our investment belongs." I felt the words like a slap. Our daughter. The way he said it sounded less like love and more like property. Something owned, not cherished. Mother lowered her eyes, pressing her napkin to her lips. She never defended me, not outright, but there was sorrow in her silence. I finished my meal in quiet, my appetite gone. Later that night, alone in my room, I pulled open my Bible. Between the thin pages of Psalms and Proverbs, I kept a secret no one else knew. It was the corner of the letter Mother hadn't managed to burn. The words were smudged and charred, but the letterhead was still clear. "Congratulations, Miss Margaret Carter." I ran my fingers over the blackened edge, whispering the rest of the words I remembered. It was proof, however fragile, that I had been chosen, that I had earned something greater than the life they tried to confine me to. I pressed the brittle paper flat between the pages and closed the Bible gently. I didn't know it then, but that hidden scrap would become my anchor, my reminder, and eventually, my weapon. In the dark of my room, I whispered to the charred fragment, "One day they'll know. One day they'll all see what they tried to bury." The years slipped by like pages torn from a calendar, each one marked not by celebrations, but by quiet endurance. My 20s were spent working by day, studying by night. I saved every spare dollar, scraping enough together for community college courses. I'd walk to the bus stop in the cold, my fingers numb from typing all day, my mind aching from memorizing legal codes after hours. No one in town spoke of me. Why would they? I was Harold Carter's dutiful daughter, tucked away behind a typewriter, helping out while her brother conquered the world. Daniel's name was the one carried in the papers, in the church bulletins, on everyone's lips. Daniel Carter finishes first year at university. Daniel Carter wins leadership award. Daniel Carter to marry Rebecca Williams, daughter of the mayor. Each headline felt like a shadow spreading further across my path. But still, I walked forward. I'll never forget the night I nearly quit. I was 25, broke, and tired of juggling rent, tuition, and bills. My boss at the law clerk's office told me, with a dismissive laugh, "Girls don't last in this field, Maggie. Too soft. Too many tears." That night, sitting at a diner counter with a cup of stale coffee, I met Eleanor Briggs. She was a lawyer, sharp, commanding, but kind. She had silver in her hair and eyes that looked right into you. She must have seen the defeat in mine. "You thinking of giving up?" she asked. I swallowed. "Does it matter? No one's waiting for me to succeed." She stirred her coffee slowly. "Then do it for yourself. Do it because they said you couldn't. That's reason enough." Her words rooted themselves deep in me. Eleanor became my mentor, my guide through the endless nights of case law and exams. She taught me not just the rules, but the spirit of justice, how to see the story behind the law. And so, brick by brick, I built the foundation of the life they swore I could never have. Meanwhile, Daniel soared. He graduated, married Rebecca in a grand ceremony, and took a position at a firm his father boasted was the finest in the state. I sat in the back pew of the church during his wedding, smiling politely while Mother dabbed her eyes and Father shook hands with every important man in town. "Daniel has made us proud," Father said in his speech, his voice swelling. "The Carter name shines bright because of him." I raised my glass and sipped quietly. No one noticed. No one asked what I had accomplished, and yet I remained dutiful. Each year I mailed Daniel a birthday card. "Happy birthday, Danny," I'd write, keeping the tone light, warm, forgiving. Sometimes he replied with a polite note. More often he didn't, but still I sent them, because family was family. Or so I told myself. My 30s were no easier, but they were steadier. Law school came and went. I graduated late, older than most of my classmates, but I wore the robe with pride. I passed the bar. I shook Eleanor's hand with tears in my eyes when she said, "See, you were never too soft. You were steel, Maggie. Steel wrapped in patience. It should have been a triumph. But when I phoned home to share the news, Father's reply was cool, perfunctory. That's fine, Maggie. But Daniel's just been promoted to partner. Isn't that something? I hung up, staring at the silent receiver, feeling the ache of words I'd never hear. We're proud of you, too. Time marched forward. Daniel and Rebecca had children. Their Christmas cards arrived with glossy photos, smiling faces, shining trees, and perfect handwriting. I pinned them to my refrigerator, even when no one pinned mine to theirs. Sometimes I wondered if I was foolish for staying in touch. Foolish for keeping my side of the bond when theirs had long frayed away. But I kept at it, because letting go felt like admitting they'd won. I told myself I had buried the past, that the sting of the burned letter, the stolen future, was only an old scar. I had my work, my cases, my independence. I had Eleanor's steady mentorship, colleagues who respected me, a reputation growing in quiet circles. Yes, I told myself I had moved on, but scars have a way of aching when storms roll in, and one storm came the day death dug it all back up again. I thought I'd buried the past, left it under ashes and silence. But when the call came, "Your father has passed, Maggie. The will is being read next week." I realized the past had only been waiting, and it was about to demand its due. Funerals are strange things. They gather people who share blood but not warmth, faces tied together by name more than love. It was a gray morning when we buried my mother, Ruth Carter. The church smelled of lilies and rain-damp coats. Hymns floated softly, the kind she used to hum while cooking. And for a fleeting moment I almost wept, not for her passing, but for the years I'd longed for her to speak up, to choose me just once. Daniel stood tall at the front with Rebecca and their grown children, receiving condolences as though he alone bore the family's sorrow. Neighbors shook his hand, calling him a good man, a strong son, the pride of Harold and Ruth. I sat 2 pews back, unnoticed, my gloved hands folded in my lap. A few old church ladies nodded politely to me, but no one lingered. I was the dutiful daughter, the one who worked, studied, lived quietly in the city. Respectable enough, but never remarkable. Not in their eyes. After the service, we walked behind the casket to the cemetery. The ground was soft from recent rain, and my shoes sank slightly as I followed. Daniel's children held umbrellas over their parents, but I walked alone. When the last hymn faded and the crowd dispersed, Daniel approached me, his tone clipped. "Maggie, the pastor says Mother wanted you to handle her things. There's a trunk in her bedroom. Old keepsakes, letters, best you sort it out." I almost asked why not him. He was the favored one after all. But something in his eyes told me he had no interest in the contents. And perhaps, for once, fate placed the burden where it belonged. That afternoon, I found myself in my mother's bedroom. The curtains were drawn, the air stale with the faintest trace of lavender powder she once used. At the foot of her bed sat the trunk, scarred and heavy, brass hinges dulled with age. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were folded quilts, brittle letters, photographs yellowed with time. I sifted through them slowly, hearing the echo of her humming in my memory. For a moment, it felt like a simple act of remembrance, until I reached the false bottom. It lifted easily, as if waiting for me. Beneath it lay a bundle of papers bound with twine, bank ledgers, loan agreements, checks. My eyes scanned them, confusion giving way to horror. They were in my name. Loans I had never taken. Debts I had never owed. Signatures forged in my mother's careful hand. And there, tucked between the pages, charred at the edges, but still whole enough to read, was my acceptance letter. "Congratulations, Miss Margaret Carter." My chest tightened. I sat back on my heels, the weight of the past crashing down. I could hear her voice again, steady but false. "We just can't afford it, Maggie. Don't dream too big." But here, in black and white, was the truth. They had afforded it. They had taken loans in my name to cover Daniel's tuition. They had burned my letter, buried my chance, and written my sacrifice into lies. For years I had carried the shame, believing I wasn't worthy, believing they had done their best with what little they had. But now I saw the truth. It wasn't about money. It was about choice. And they chose him. I pressed the letter against my chest, feeling its brittle edges cut into my gloves. For so long, I had told myself forgiveness was strength, that bearing the past made me noble. But standing there in that darkened room, with the proof of their betrayal spread across the floor, something inside me shifted. I whispered into the silence, my voice breaking but fierce. But you could, and you did. The words hung in the air, echoing against the walls. I wasn't that dutiful daughter anymore. I wasn't the girl who swallowed disappointment at the dinner table. I was a woman with the truth in my hands, and a fire rekindled in my chest. Mother may have gone to her grave with her secrets, but I had unearthed them, and now I would decide what to do with them. As I gathered the papers and folded the letter carefully back into my Bible, I felt the first stirrings of resolve. Justice wasn't just a word Eleanor had taught me, it was a calling, and now it was personal. I closed the trunk and looked around the room that had once been my mother's sanctuary. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt, no longing for her approval, only clarity. They stole my future, I whispered. Now I'll take back what's mine. Grief has a way of stirring up more than sorrow. After Mother's funeral, it wasn't just her absence I carried, it was the trunk, the papers, the truth that pressed heavy against my chest like an iron weight. I should have felt closure, the kind people speak of when they bury their parents. But instead, I felt torn in two. At night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, hearing Father's voice in my head. A woman doesn't need schooling the way a man does. Daniel carries the name. The words echoed as sharp as the day they were spoken, as if no years had passed at all. And yet, he was old now, frail. The once imposing Harold Carter had a cane, a shuffle to his step, and a cough that rattled through church pews. Was there justice in dragging him into the light, or was that just cruelty? He's old now, I whispered one night to the empty room. But the wound he made never aged a day. The dilemma gnawed at me. For so long I'd believed forgiveness was the noble path. To forgive, to bury the pain, to let God handle the rest. But the brittle paper in my Bible told a different story. Forgiveness had never set me free. It had only chained me to silence. I needed a voice wiser than mine, so I went to see Eleanor. She was older too, her once black hair silver now, but her mind was as sharp as the first day we met. We sat in her office, books stacked high, the smell of old leather and ink filling the air. I laid the papers before her. The forged loans, the ledgers, the letter that should have been my beginning. She read quietly, her glasses low on her nose. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "This is fraud," she said simply. "They stole from you. They took your future and rewrote it for their convenience." I swallowed. But what good does it do now? He's old. My mother's gone. Daniel has his life, his career. Do I tear it all down? For what? For me? Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. Maggie, sometimes justice isn't about you. It's about the truth being told. About setting the record straight. Not just for your own soul, but for anyone who ever thought they had the right to decide who mattered and who didn't. Her words pierced through me. Still, I hesitated. Later that week, I visited Aunt Clara, my mother's younger sister. She lived in a small clapboard house at the edge of town, with lace curtains and the smell of cinnamon tea always in the air. She had never been one to meddle, but she had always been kind. I showed her the burnt letter. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling. Ruth, oh Maggie, I wondered. I suspected. She always said Daniel was her crown jewel. But you were the one who had the fire. Her hand gripped mine thin and trembling. Child, listen to me. The truth may hurt, but silence kills. Don't let their choice bury yours. If you have the chance to set it right, even at this stage, you take it. You hear me? You take it. That night, I walked alone through town, the street lamps glowing dim against the autumn fog. My steps carried me toward the courthouse, as if pulled by something greater than will. The steps rose before me, stone and solemn, worn smooth by decades of feet seeking justice. I stood at the bottom, staring up, my heart pounding. In my purse lay the papers. In my chest, the war raged between forgiveness and justice, between silence and truth. I placed my hand on the cold railing, feeling the chill of metal seep into my skin. If I step inside, I whispered to the night. There's no turning back. The courthouse loomed above me. Waiting, I took one slow step upward, the echo ringing in the silence. Tomorrow, the choice would be made. Forgiveness, or the fire of justice. The next morning, I stood at the courthouse doors with papers in my trembling hands. For years, I'd walked past these steps as though they belonged to someone else's life. Lawyers, judges, citizens with grievances greater than mine. But today, they belonged to me. The clerk looked at me over her glasses as I slid the documents across the counter. Fraud, conversion, theft of opportunity, she read aloud, raising her brows. That's a heavy case. I steadied my voice. So was what they did to me. Her stamp came down with a dull thud, sealing my decision. In that moment, there was no going back. Word traveled faster than fire in dry grass. Within days, the town buzzed with the news. Maggie Carter is suing her own family. At church the following Sunday, whispers filled the pews. Old friends avoided my eyes. Some shook their heads. Others leaned close to one another, their mouths twisting with pity or judgment. I sat alone, Bible open on my lap, though I barely read a word. Father confronted me first. He came to my apartment, his cane striking the floor in sharp, angry beats. His once proud shoulders slumped, but his voice carried the same booming authority it always had. "You've lost your senses, girl," he barked. "Dragging our name through mud at your age? For what? A letter you should have burned long ago?" I felt my body stiffen. That letter was my future, and you knew it. You told me we couldn't afford my dreams. All the while, you gave Daniel everything. His face darkened, his lips thinning into a bitter line. "Daniel is my son. I am your daughter," I whispered, the ache cutting deep. But he only turned away, his silence speaking louder than any words. Daniel's anger was quieter, but sharper, like a knife hidden under cloth. He cornered me outside the grocery store, his wife lingering behind him with wary eyes. "Maggie," he said, his smile tight. "Whatever this is, end it. People are talking. Do you want to ruin the family? Ruin me?" "I never wanted to ruin you," I said, meeting his eyes. I only wanted what was mine. What was fair. He leaned closer, his voice low. "You'll regret this. Father won't survive the shame." I felt a pang, but I stood firm. Shame is born of truth, Daniel, not lies. If he cannot bear it, perhaps it should never have been hidden. He stared at me for a long moment, then walked away without another word. His wife glanced back once, her expression unreadable. When the legal papers reached their hands, the Carters hired counsel. Of course, it had to be Charles Benton. I remembered him well. A slick, silver-haired family friend who had smoked cigars on our porch in the summers of my childhood. He had been my father's hunting partner, Daniel's golf companion. He knew all the old stories, all the Carter secrets, and now he would be my opponent. Benton greeted me at the preliminary hearing with a smile that curled at the edges like smoke. His suit was pressed to perfection, his shoes gleaming as though they had never touched real ground. "Well, well," he drawled, adjusting his cufflinks. "If it isn't little Maggie Carter, all grown up. I must say, I never expected you'd turn your hand against your own blood. But then, pride is a dangerous thing." I kept my face calm, though inside my heart beat hard against my ribs. "This isn't about pride," I said softly. He leaned in just enough that I could smell the faint cologne he always wore, the one that had clung to our house after his visits. "Then what is it about, dear?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Truth." For the first time, his smirk faltered. Only for a second, but I saw it, and I held onto that flicker like a promise. The hearing began, wooden benches creaking under the weight of bodies pressing close to watch. Old neighbors, distant cousins, townsfolk who had once praised the Carter name, they all filled the room. As the judge called the case, I sat straighter, papers clutched in my hands, and felt every eye on me. They waited to see if I would crumble, if I would flinch under Benton's practiced sneer or father's heavy glare. But I did not. When Benton rose to his feet, his voice was smooth as silk, his words dripping with feigned pity. "Your Honor, we are here because a woman seeks to destroy her own family, not out of need, but out of vanity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He smiled as though he had already won. I stood slowly, my voice quiet but steady. "No, not vanity, not pride. I am here because the truth was buried with lies, and I intend to dig it up. If blood is destroyed, it is not by my hand, but by what was done long ago." The judge raised a brow, his gavel tapping lightly. The room went still, and in the silence, Benton leaned toward me again, his smirk returning like a shadow. "You'll destroy your own blood for pride?" "Hosmers," he whispered, just low enough for me to hear. I looked him in the eye, my words sharp and steady as a blade. "No, for truth." The gavel fell, echoing through the chamber. The case was set. The battle for the Carter legacy had begun. The papers arrived in a thick manila envelope, heavier than any weight I'd carried in my hands. My attorney slid it across the table to me in her office, her expression grave. "Discovery," she said simply. You'll want to see this? I unfolded the document slowly, each page crisp, official, undeniable. My name leapt off the lines in sharp black ink. Margaret Carter, loan papers, bank ledgers. And then my breath caught signatures, my handwriting, or at least what looked like it, but I hadn't signed them. The pen strokes were heavy, too deliberate, as if someone had studied my hand and mimicked it. They had forged my name, loans taken out under my identity, debts never mine but tied to me all the same. I felt the room tilt, my stomach sink. They used me, I whispered. Not just my dream, my name, my future. My attorney nodded. It's fraud, Maggie. Clear as day. This will hold in court. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt sick. I found Daniel that evening, waiting by his car outside the grocery store. He must have known the evidence had surfaced, because his face was pale, his usual confidence shaken. Daniel, I said, stepping close. I saw the papers. You knew about them, didn't you? He glanced around, as if the very air might carry our words to listening ears. Then he leaned in, his voice low. Look, Maggie, I didn't want this. Father made choices. Mother followed. I just benefited. Benefited? My voice cracked with anger. You wore my future like a suit tailored to fit your name. You took the years that were meant for me? He winced, but then his expression hardened. It's over now. The past is done. You have your career, your success. Why drag this out? You'll ruin us. You'll ruin me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check, slid it toward me like a peace offering. Or a bribe. Take it, he whispered. More than what tuition would have cost back then. You'll be compensated. No one needs to know. I stared at the paper, the inked promise of money, and for a heartbeat I saw the girl I once was, the one who would have grasped at any scrap of help, who would have worked herself raw for a single chance. But that girl was gone. I pushed the check back into his chest. You can't buy back a stolen life, Daniel. You can't erase betrayal with a number. His jaw tightened. Then you'll destroy us all. No, I said quietly. You already did. Later, I faced Father. He sat in his chair, the room dim, only the tick of the grandfather clock between us. His cane leaned against the wall, his hands folded on his lap. For a moment, he looked like a weary old man, fragile as paper. But when he spoke, the same iron lay beneath his voice. Everything we did was for the family, he said, his eyes hard, unrepentant. Daniel was the heir. The Carter name rests on his shoulders. Sacrifices had to be made. I felt heat rise in my chest. Sacrifices? You mean me. My future, my name. You didn't hesitate to throw it on the fire. You're my daughter, he said stiffly. But Daniel carries the name forward. That is what matters. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held his gaze. You never meant me when you said family. He looked away, lips pressed tight, as if my words had landed sharper than he'd expected. But he said nothing, and in his silence, I finally saw the truth. There had never been space for me at the table where decisions were made. When the next hearing came, the courtroom was packed tighter than before. The air was thick with whispers, the scrape of shoes against the wooden floor, the rustle of papers. I sat straight-backed, my Bible hidden in my bag, the half-burned letter still tucked inside it like a witness only I could see. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. He frowned at the forged signatures, the ledgers marked with my name. His gavel tapped once, sharp against the block. These claims are not without merit, he said, his voice steady, measured. This case will proceed to full trial. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the scrape of Benton's chair as he shot to his feet in protest. Father's face darkened, Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. But me? I sat still, the storm swirling around me, and let my breath out slow. The truth was no longer hidden. It had been dragged into the light, and now the fight would begin in earnest. As the courtroom emptied, Benton leaned close, his whisper hot with warning. You've opened a door you'll never be able to close. I met his eyes and whispered back, steady as stone. Good. Let it stay open. The wooden chair creaked under me as I swore my oath. My palms were damp, and the Bible beneath my hand felt heavier than any law book I'd ever read. When I sat facing the judge and the dozen watchful jurors, the courtroom seemed to shrink, pressing me into the past I had come to lay bare. Ms. Carter, my attorney began, tell us what happened when you were 18. I took a breath and let my voice carry steady, though every word pulled against old scars. I had been accepted to college. A scholarship had come, a full ride. It was everything I had worked for. I spent nights at the diner, mornings tutoring my brother. I saved every penny. I was ready. I paused, meeting the eyes of the jurors, some nodding faintly as though they understood. But when the letter came, it disappeared. My mother told me we couldn't afford it. My father said a woman didn't need schooling the way a man did. And my brother, Daniel, he went off to college in my place. The words tasted bitter, though I had swallowed them for decades. I reached into my bag and drew out the fragile paper, its edges blackened, brittle with age. I kept this. Half of that letter, burned, but not gone. I kept it hidden in my Bible all these years. The judge leaned forward to look. Whispers rippled through the room. And in every step of my life since, I said, voice trembling, I have carried the echo of their words. They told me we couldn't afford it. Silence followed, heavy as stone. Next came Aunt Clara. She looked small on the stand, her hands twisting the hem of her skirt. But her voice was steady when the questions came. Mrs. Whitmore, my attorney asked, do you recall an incident involving Maggie's college letter? Clara nodded, her eyes soft with memory. Yes. One evening, I visited my sister Ruth. I walked into the kitchen and saw her feeding paper into the stove. I thought it strange. I caught a glimpse of the letterhead before it burned away. It was from the college. And did she say why she was burning it? Clara's lips pressed together. She told me Maggie's future had already been decided, that Daniel would carry the Carter name, and Maggie, well, she'd find her place. Gasps rustled across the benches. Benton rose sharply, objecting, but the judge waved him down. Clara sat straighter, her gaze sweeping across the room before resting on me. They told her they couldn't afford it, she said, repeating my echo. But I always wondered if that was the truth. The next witness nearly broke me. The bank clerk was an old man now, his back curved with time, but his memory had not faded. He leaned forward, squinting at the documents before him. Yes, he said, pointing with a trembling hand. I remember these papers. Harold Carter came in with them. Brought his son along once or twice. Needed loans for tuition, he said, but he had his daughter's name written on the forms. Are you certain? My attorney pressed. As certain as a man can be, the clerk replied. I asked him once why the girl wasn't there to sign. He laughed and said women didn't need to bother with papers. He signed them himself, with her name. The words hit like a hammer. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Father sat stony-faced at the defense table, but his knuckles whitened against his cane. Daniel shifted uneasily, sweat glistening on his brow. The judge looked grave as he accepted the clerk's sworn statement into the record. When my attorney rested her case, I sat straighter, though my heart was pounding. We had laid it bare. The letter burned, the signature stolen, the lie dressed up as sacrifice. Benton rose with a practiced smile, smoothing his suit jacket as he approached the bench. Your Honor, he said smoothly, we've heard much about faded letters and memories decades old. But memories are fragile things. Pride can twist them. Regret can exaggerate them. Let us not confuse bitterness with truth. His words rippled through the room, but I didn't flinch. My truth had stood for itself, and the jurors' eyes had softened as I spoke. Benton could polish lies all he wanted. They no longer gleamed the way they once had. The judge cleared his throat. The defense may call their witness. And then the moment came. Daniel Carter, Benton announced. My brother rose slowly, his face pale, his lips tight. As he walked toward the stand, all I could see was the boy I had once tutored by lamplight, the boy I had prayed for when he left for college, the boy who had become the man sitting before me now, ready to defend the life he had taken from me. I gripped the edge of the bench. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. His truth, or his lies, would be laid bare. The bailiff held out the Bible. Daniel placed his hand on it, his voice low as he swore the oath. And in that silence, I wondered, would he tell the truth, or bury it one last time? Daniel sat stiffly in the witness chair, his hand still resting where it had sworn the oath. For a moment, he kept his eyes fixed on the floor, as though the grain of the wood could shield him from what was about to come. Benton began his questioning gently, painting Daniel as the dutiful son, the golden boy who had carried the Carter name with pride. Daniel nodded along, shoulders straightening as if he could still play that part for the jury. But then came the cross-examination. My attorney stood, her papers crisp in her hands. Her voice was calm, deliberate. Mr. Carter, did you know your sister had been offered a full scholarship? Daniel shifted. Not at first, he said. I only learned when she mentioned it. But Father said it wasn't possible. And did you question him? His jaw tightened. He told me it was family business, that I was chosen to carry the Carter name. So you accepted the money in her place. A pause. His throat worked as he swallowed. Yes. The word dropped like a stone in water, sending ripples across the room. Gasps broke out, whispers stirred. The golden son had admitted, in his own voice, what I had known all along. My attorney pressed further. And did you ever think to tell her the truth? Daniel's eyes finally flicked to me. For the first time, they did not burn with arrogance, but with something smaller, weaker. Regret. I thought about it, he whispered. But I was afraid of losing Father's respect, afraid of losing everything. The weight of his words filled the room. He had chosen fear over me, over blood, over truth. Then it was Father's turn. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane, his once proud figure bent with age but still commanding attention. Benton's questions came like soft tosses, each one giving him a chance to defend the Carter legacy. And defend it he did. I did what I had to, Father declared, his voice firm, though his eyes glistened. Our family name depended on Daniel. He was the one meant to rise. Everything I did was for the family. For honor. His words scraped against me like gravel. The judge leaned forward, his face stern, his voice carrying the weight of the gavel. Mr. Carter, honor cannot be built on deception. A house built on lies will always fall. What you did was not sacrifice. It was theft. Father's cane trembled in his grip. His lips parted, but no defense came. Instead, his shoulders slumped, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. For the first time, he looked small, not the man who had towered over our dinner table, not the patriarch who decided destinies, but an old man breaking under the truth. He turned his head toward me, his eyes searching mine with desperation, and in a voice I had never heard from him before, thin, cracked, pleading, he whispered, "Forgive me." But I did not speak. Silence was the only answer I could give. The judge cleared his throat. The room hushed. Every ear strained to catch the words that would decide it all. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Margaret Carter, he said, his tone crisp and unyielding. Full restitution is awarded for the fraudulent loans and misappropriated funds. Further, the record shall reflect acknowledgement of wrongdoing by Harold and Daniel Carter. Let it be known, justice is served. The gavel struck once, twice. Final. The air in the courtroom shifted. Some gasped, others bowed their heads. Benton's jaw tightened, his polished composure slipping. Aunt Clara wept softly in the back row, and Daniel sat frozen, his hands limp in his lap, his golden image shattered before the town that had once praised him. As for Father, he leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, as though the words had sucked the breath out of him. I sat still, hands folded, heart pounding, but my face calm. I had waited a lifetime for this moment, for truth to step out of the shadows. And now it stood tall in the light. When the bailiff called adjournment, the crowd began to spill out, voices buzzing with shock and disbelief. I rose, gathering my papers, my Bible pressed against my chest with the half-burned letter still tucked inside. As I turned toward the doors, I caught Father's eyes one last time. He looked at me, his lips parting as though to repeat his plea. Forgive me, but I gave him nothing. No words, no nod, only silence. And then I walked away. The heavy courthouse door swung open, and the world outside rushed in. A sea of flashing cameras, reporters shouting my name, microphones thrust forward. The cool air hit my face, sharp and alive. I stood at the top of the steps, blinded by the sudden light, and for a single heartbeat I thought of the girl I had once been, the one who had walked past these very steps, too afraid to dream she belonged inside. Now, I walked down them as a woman who had carried truth in her hands and laid it bare for all to see. The cameras flashed, the questions shouted, the world leaned in, and I whispered to myself, just loud enough to hear, "It begins now." The crowd pressed closer, reporters demanding answers. But I kept walking, the letter against my heart. Justice had been won, but the story of what came after had only just begun. The cemetery was quiet, save for the whisper of wind weaving through rows of stone markers. Autumn leaves had gathered at the base of the Carter plot, the reds and golds like embers cooling after a long, relentless fire. I stood with the half-burned letter clutched in my hand, its edges brittle, its words still legible despite the decades it had spent hidden in my Bible. My mother's name was etched into the granite, clean and final. Ruth Carter, beloved wife and mother. Beloved. The word mocked me. I traced the letters with my fingers, wondering how a woman who had carried me into this world could also have carried the match that lit the destruction of my dreams. I had won in court. I had taken back what was mine. But as I stared at her grave, I felt no triumph, only the hollow echo of what could never be returned. I kneeled, setting the letter down at the base of the stone. Half charred, half whole, just like the truth of my life. They told me we couldn't afford it, I whispered. But we could. And you knew it. You burned my future so Daniels could rise. The wind picked up, lifting strands of my hair across my face. For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the ache wash over me. Memories stirred, late nights at the diner, aching feet, my hands ink-stained from tutoring Daniel through essays he barely cared about. I had given him everything, and still, they had chosen him over me. I gained justice, I said softly, but I lost the idea of family I once believed in. The words fell heavy, final, like soil onto a coffin. I thought of father, of how he had sat in that courtroom, bent and broken, whispering for forgiveness that I could not give. His honor had been exposed as hollow, and with it, the Carter name he had worshipped above flesh and blood. I thought of Daniel, who had admitted guilt with trembling lips, but too late to make it mean anything. His golden reputation, cracked open for all to see, still glittered faintly in the public eye. Some would forgive him, others would not. But forgiveness was no longer mine to offer. And then I thought of myself, a girl who once tucked dreams into her apron pocket and counted tips under the glow of a diner lamp. A woman who clawed her way through night school, law school, and every sneer that said she didn't belong. I had survived them all. I had endured. And finally, I had won. But victories come with shadows. Mine stretched long across the ground of this graveyard, reminding me that justice, though righteous, does not restore. It only balances. I reached for the letter again, pressing it to my chest. The paper crinkled against my coat, its jagged edge scratching my palm. It was proof of their betrayal, yes, but also proof of my survival. I thought I'd buried the past, I murmured. But you dug it up for me, Mother. Your trunk. Your secrets. Your lies, the silence around me seemed to answer. Leaves rustled. A crow cawed in the distance. No apology came. No comfort. Only the truth. Cold, sharp, unyielding. I stood, brushing the dirt from my knees. My eyes lingered on the stone one last time. Justice came late, I said, voice steady now. But it came. And sometimes, that is enough. As I walked back toward the gate, the world felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because the truth had been spoken. Heavier because I knew it had cost me the very thing I had once longed for most. Family. But perhaps family is not always the blood that binds us. Perhaps it is the truth we choose to carry. The dignity we fight to keep. At the edge of the cemetery, I turned and looked back one final time. The grave sat still, the letter pressed against its base like a wound laid bare. And for the first time I felt no pull to return. The dead had taken enough from me. The living still had stories to hear. So if this story touched you, share it. Because families should never hide the truth. Tell me in the comments if you've ever seen greed tear families apart. And don't forget to subscribe so I can share more stories like mine. Because sometimes the past burns us. But sometimes, when we dare to face it, we find the fire was not only meant to destroy, it was meant to light the path forward.